In this video, we're going to talk about focus order. And before we get started, I just want to say that I have undocked several things on here and repositioned. So I am looking at my timeline over here on the left, and then I have my slide layers expanded fully over here on the right. And everything else has been undocked and removed from this screen. When a learner interacts with a storyline slide, focus order determines the order in which the items on the slide or the objects on your slide are encountered. And specifically, this is related to accessibility because it matters for screen readers or anyone who is using keyboard navigation. So in order to access the focus order on your slide, you can go to the Home tab and then select Focus Order in the slide section. And this opens up your focus order window. Now, I like to drag this out a little bit, stretch it so that I can see these fully written out. It just makes it easier, but you may not need to do that. What this is going to show you is the default focus order. So the way that the focus order is decided by default is that it starts at the top left of your slide and then goes down to the bottom right of your slide. And each object along the way it encounters, it includes on the focus order. So it also starts with any layers that you have, and it puts those first. So you can see on these different layers that I have here, I have one item on each layer that is a caption, and it is showing those items first. And then it goes to the base layer items. So on our slide, we have things, and visually they look ordered a certain way. But when we go back and look at the focus order, there might be some surprises. So for instance, we have underneath our options layers, we see we have this first item that is a slide outline, and then we have a title up at the very top, and then a purple background, then our icon, our feedback options. And then down here we can see we have our first button, but then we see the instructions, and then we have our next buttons. So let's take a look at our slide and see why. Again, remember that it always takes the focus order from what is at the top left down to the bottom right. So the first thing that it showed was this main outline here. That's actually hard for me to click on from up there because it's on the same place as our title. But this overall outline we have, this is at the very top and extends all the way down to the very bottom. So this gets the very first item. Then after that is this title. Then we have this purple box. Then we have this, and then these icons come next. Then we have this button, but then this box right here, that is our caption box, comes next from the top down. And so that's why it breaks it up. So it makes sense in this slide, the way we have positioned all of these elements, that we're going to want to make some adjustments to our focus order. So the way you do that is go back up to that focus order, and then there's a few different things we can do. First off, we always want to remove anything that isn't meaningful to a non-sighted user. So for instance, that outline, this isn't really helping. This isn't helping whether they're using keyboard navigation or whether they are not sighted and they're using a screen reader. So we want to always remove these kinds of unnecessary but just visually pleasing or design elements that we've got in our slides. So this is a perfect example. So is this purple background. So I'm going to use the Control key so that I can select things out of order. Now we definitely want to keep a title because that tells anybody who's on the slide what the actual title of that slide is. And for accessibility, that's always important to have. But we don't need something like a binocular icon. That's not helping anybody other than the visually able students to understand that they're seeing something. And even for them, it's just a design element. It's not going to make the content any more or less impactful necessarily. So we can always get rid of those. Now these feedback options, these were things that I have designed on the slide to change when the user selects the different options, then they will visually change. So again, these are going to be visual cues. These are not going to be actually giving any additional context. So again, we're going to go ahead and include those in the ones we want to remove. And then down here, we definitely want to keep our buttons. Those are always important. And we always want to keep instructions. Those are important. And then here we have some navigation elements, and those are also important. So we have selected all of the items we want to remove. All I have to do is select this little trash can icon at the bottom. Now this will not delete these items from our slide. All it does is delete them from our focus order. So when I do that, they all disappear. And if you ever accidentally remove something that you want to put back, that's where you would use this plus button, and then you could pick the item here. Or if you want to put everything back, you can select this item up at the very top for all objects. But we're happy with that. Those are the items that we want to remove. And the next thing I want to show you is this alt text. By default, you typically are not going to see anything in this alt text unless you have added it already to a specific object. So if you haven't added it to anything, you're not going to see anything. I have entered in alt text for these buttons because the name of my button gives it the meaning. I've done this so that I can see in my timeline which ones they are very clearly, and I can use that in my triggers to make it easy for me. But the advantage of naming them this way as well is that now the screen reader is going to also announce that button as option 1 button. Well, that's what I want it to say. I don't need it to read the label at the end. So I've entered in alt text for each of the buttons that just say exactly what I want it to say, which in this case is the name of the button. You can also use this if your item has something that you don't want and you want it to say something else. So for instance, perhaps I didn't want it to say on the regular captions, the regular caption 1 part, and I only want it to say the actual text on those captions. One thing you need to be mindful of though, if you change the alt text for this to just be the exact text on the item, if you go and make any changes to that text, you have to always come back and change it here as well. So this is a place where you want to be very mindful about how you use that. And what I might do instead of changing the alt text here is actually going to those items and renaming them, because the reason they have this at the beginning is because I have not renamed those caption items in my layers yet. And I'll show you that right now. But first I want to save this because we have removed those items from our default focus order. I want to make sure that that gets saved. And then I want to go back here to one of my layers and show you rectangular caption 1. If I rename this to say instructions, then now when I go back and I look at my focus order again, now you can see for my layers 1, it says instructions, and then it will read the instructions. That's much better, and then I don't have to worry about changing the text here in this field. It's always going to read whatever I put in that caption. And so that's the ideal way to do it, is just make sure that you have named it so that when it's read out what this item is, that it's something useful and not something generic like we see in this example. Now the next thing we want to look at though is the actual order of these things. This is our focus order, and maybe the order doesn't always make sense by the way it is by default, and in our case that's very true. We have an instruction here that comes right after the first button, and it would make more sense if our button options were all together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom focus order by selecting this option up at the top. And now what that lets me do is I can now click on and drag any of these items and reposition them. So when I as I'm hovering, you can see that I get a blue line showing me where that's going to be inserted. So here I'm going to move those instructions to right after the title. That way, when they are first entering a slide, they hear the title. Then the next thing that they are going to hear is the instructions. And then the very next thing after that is going to be that they're going to get those different option buttons. So it makes sense that this follows in this order. And then down here, I have the back arrow, the next arrow, and then the home button. On my slide, the home button is actually located in between the back arrow and the next arrow. I think that makes sense, so I'm going to leave that as it is, but I'm going to go ahead and select save so that we make sure that we get that change we made to the instructions and changing that order around. And now when we go and we look at any of these other layers and we check the focus order there, you're going to see that it's exactly the same as our base layer. And that is because these layers, they're all a part of the same slide. And this is giving us the focus order of our entire slide. And the great thing about Storyline is that it's not ever going to read the option for layer item when they are not visibly showing the option for layer. So Storyline keeps that straight for you. You don't have to ever worry about that. And you also don't have to worry that when you're looking at the focus order, when you're on option 1 layer, that you're seeing any of these other options. If you have selected in your layer to not show things, then it's going to not show them. So what I mean by that is if you check this little gear icon down here to look at the properties, so on this, if you have chosen any of these options, that's going to impact what in that focus order is being changed as they're tabbing through the various things. So if they are not able to interact with objects on the base layer, for instance, they're not going to be hearing those items when they are trying to tab through because they're not able to actually tab through those things. So just be mindful of that even if you see those, the focus order is always for that entire slide. Now, I hope this has given you some information that's helpful for you on working with your slides and making them more accessible. And I look forward to talking with you in the next video. Thanks for watching, sharing, and improving education, one essential step at a time.